I'm going to talk this week about friendship, and start by just mentioning the Upada Sutta in the Samyutta Nikaya, which many of you might have come across, where the Buddha famously tells Ananda, his faithful companion, that friendship is not half of the spiritual life, as Ananda had suggested, but it is in fact the whole of the spiritual life. So we're going to bring in the subject of friendship tonight in relation to metta. So let's have a little look at the points we're going to canter through. So I'm going to say something about why, in general, I think friendship is important. Talk about good friendship and spiritual friendship. And then just bring in metta and how we can use that to expand our sense of friendship. Thank you very much, Emma. So firstly, what's so important about friendship? Well, since the start of the COVID pandemic and the need for all the restrictions to be placed on what some of us would argue is our natural desire as sort of social animals to mix with others, many people have experienced a real sense of loneliness. Being able to easily share the ups and downs of our lives has proven to be really quite difficult for some. But in my experience, my strongest friendships have always seemed to transcend the need for physical contact or physical intimacy. And one of the deepest friendships I have is with someone who lives in Stockholm, who I haven't physically been present with for a couple of years now. But our bond is extremely strong, and in many respects, because we've always connected very regularly online anyway, the pandemic hasn't really made much difference. So what do we need for friendship? So in my experience, there seems to be three key components. Firstly, it's simply the fact that I enjoy the interaction with the other person. So this can often mean just a sort of shared common interest. Secondly, there does need to be intimacy. And I'm not talking about physical intimacy here, but rather a depth in what we share and on what we expose about our lives to each other. My small circle of close friends are those to whom I can really show myself. I can talk deeply about my desires, my mistakes, and my fears. So in a sense, nothing is off limits. And then thirdly, there needs to be a knowledge of each other. So this third component only really comes about over time. So I can be as open as I like to someone I've just met. It might be scary, but I could. But that real depth, that real trust, that real friendship, in my experience, comes about over time. And what I'm talking about here is what I would call good friendship, not simply ordinary friendship. And I want to give you a couple of examples of this outside the context of my Dharma friends. So firstly, I have a friend who I've known for almost 40 years. We spent some of our formative years working together for the same company, and we got to know each other really well. We both love hiking and also back in the day camping, although we just do the walking bit these days. But over the years, our ethical lives have become quite similar, even though he would call himself an agnostic. He's never shown any interest in a Dharma life. And there's certainly a depth to our friendship, although I know that at times he comes under pressure from his business partner to behave in certain ways, which I wouldn't be able to. So there feels like there's a ceiling to how far that friendship could actually go. So it feels like it's a long way off and we still have a great closeness, but I have a sense that there's a line of some sort. My second example is a friend with whom I worked during the last years of my working life. And we share a passion and a love for music. He's a drummer, but he's also a committed Christian. And outside of my Dharma friends, I think he's one of the most honest people that I've ever met. And I remember asking him once about this level of integrity that he has. And he just said, it's so I can sleep straight in bed at night. And I've never really forgotten that. Now, there might be some sort of ceiling in that relationship as well because of our different views of our spiritual lives. But in some way, that feels a bit further off than my other friend. And then finally, there's the example of my friend from Sweden, who I mentioned earlier. And our Dharma lives were intimately twined together during ordination. We shared a small hut in the Spanish mountains for 4 months and really got to know each other very well indeed. And it's that friendship, as opposed to the other two, which really feels that it has no limits. And I think that's to do with the fact that there's a common endeavor. So we've got that desire of deepening our going for refuge to the three jewels, a heartfelt wish, if you like, for awakening. But what all of these friendships have in common is my sense of metta towards each of those men. And I've said that it feels like there's a ceiling, a limit somehow to two of those relationships, but actually that's just a theory, because in reality it's never been tested, and I just consider myself to be there for them in a sort of open-hearted and fully responsive way, in terms of whatever they kind of need. And these sorts of relationships are great for developing our sense of metta off the cushions. And that's because to the extent that I feel metta towards them is the extent to which my metta is activated. So being in relationship with people in this way really enables me to activate my metta. And as many of you will know, when our sense of metta, when our metta comes into contact with someone who's suffering, karuna, compassion, arises, and we act to help alleviate the suffering of that person. And when our sense of metta for someone comes into contact with another's good fortune, then mudita, empathetic or sympathetic joy arises. And one of the most delightful examples of this that I've seen recently was Atulya Matti telling some of the other order members in Culture about several women who had asked to become mitras. And the sheer, almost childlike delight from Atulya Matti is, for me, they're just the perfect example of metta being transformed into mudita, and then her acting on this and rejoicing in her friends. And what's key in these situations, in these relationships, if it really is metta, there's no expectation of anything in return. And I think, sadly, that's quite alien to many people in our society today. There's often a suspicion of a hidden agenda or someone wanting something in return. And I've noticed myself that sometimes when I give someone from our Sangha something like a book, there's a tendency for them to feel that they should somehow be repaying me, that there needs to be some sort of exchange somehow. And I think that's because we're so used to the near enemy of metta, which is pema. And my favorite translation of this is sticky love. And in Living with Kindness, Sangharakshita describes pema as a mixture of honest affection and an expectation of some return. And he also says that when we give affection, we want something back. And when a little intensity develops in our friendship, we can end up with a dependency that has something of the nature of an unspoken contract. So our close friendships, maybe even our spiritual friendships, are a great opportunity to hone our development of metta. And for many of us, it may be the easiest stage in the Mettā Bhavana. However, when we reflect upon and examine our metta for our friends off the cushion, it's important that we look out for those signs of attachment, that stickiness of pema. So developing and deepening friendships based on metta is important, not just because it addresses a social need in us as human beings, but because it allows us to create opportunities for ourselves to refine and expand our own sense of metta. Okay, so that leads us quickly on to this week's top tip. And I just wanted to share a few of my thoughts on friendships for a Dharma life. So let's start with an honest and private assessment of our current friendships. I really like Maitreya Bandhu's suggestion in the Journey in the Guide of creating a mandala of our friendships. So large sheet of paper, draw a circle in the center to represent yourself, and then place circles around it representing your friends on the sheet. The closer they are to you, the more important you see that friendship at the moment, at this time. Then take a look at how much time you're actually spending with each of those friends. Are the ones you value the most actually where you're spending the most time? And to develop that knowledge and intimacy, which I mentioned earlier, you do have to be active and you have to spend time with those people. Next, review each friendship in respect of your Dharma life. Maybe we need to review how important each of our friends is in respect to our going for refuge. And they might need to move around on the mandala. And then next, take some time for an honest appraisal of the extent to which metta or pema are alive in each relationship. Now, I'm suggesting you do this completely privately, not suggesting you show it to anyone. It's a private reflection. And like most mandalas, it can be sort of repeated over time. We can also look at how we might deepen these friendships, the ones which seem most important to supporting our Dharma life. So can we spend more time with a particular friend? Do we need to listen more? Could we be more accommodating and communicate with them in a different way? And as Maitreya Bandhu also says in his book, the way to make a friend is to be a friend. So we may need to ask ourselves, are we sitting back waiting for our friend to phone, text or email us? Remember, metta is active and our communication systems are two-way. So rather than sitting around feeling lonely, maybe because no one has called or messaged us, we should take the initiative. And we really should do that. Friendships are important in many ways, but most crucially, they allow us to connect beyond our narrow sense of self and give the metta we are developing in meditation the chance to find true expression in the world, because ultimately that's where it's most needed.